Hello friends and welcome to 3 a.m. Europe. This past weekend, as some of you may know, the so-called annual meeting for the Bilderberg Group occurred in Dresden, Germany from June the 9th to the 12th. And for many years the Bilderberg was considered to be a conspiracy theory. But with the arrival of the internet and the rise of alternative media and investigative journalists who, by the way, are real journalists, mainstream media and the political establishment are not able to hide its agenda anymore. And the past couple of years, more and more attention have been given to these annual meetings. I was actually surprised to read on CNBC, Bilderberg, world's most powerful flock to annual secret meeting. Over the years, there have been rumors of carrier launches and future presidents decided at Bilderberg. Bill Clinton was a conference attendee in 1991 as a mere governor of Arkansas, a year before he was elected U.S. president. Tony Blair was only a shadow minister when he got his invitation in 1993, said UK newspaper The Independent. And it is basically being chaired by Henry de Castries, and who also happens to be accounted. This year's attendees include all kinds of people, CEOs of multinationals, including Shell, Deutsche Bank, Airbus, Siemens. Henry Kissinger is there, Wolfgang Schäuble is there, José Manuel Barroso is there, Christina Lagarde, Klaus Schwab, and so many other people are there. And so I think this is very interesting that they call it a private meeting. But you see, nothing is further from the truth if they don't mean private by meaning secret. But the fact of the matter is that it's not secret anymore either, because everybody knows that they are going to gather together. You see, if political and financial leaders assemble to discuss certain things, let us put it in this way, they don't come as mere private citizens like you and I would. If so, that would be a private meeting. Instead, they have been invited for the particular reason because they are representing somebody or something, be it a political leader, CEOs from multinational corporations, or something else. I mean, if this does not irritate you, that the world's 150 most powerful leaders assembled for a couple of days and discussing behind closed doors, yours and mine future, I don't know what does. Unfortunately, we have let the entertainment industry dictate to us what is important in society and for our civilization, where movies and sports and celebrities and Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, they come first. But the real things dealing with our own existence, political and economy and the intrinsic value and dignity and liberty of each individual, they are just secondary. Who cares what these people are discussing and planning behind closed doors? As long as I can be in my bubble without anyone interfering and challenging my illusionary worldview, as long as I'm able to tweet and to put up some pictures on, Instagram or what have you, I am just fine. If there would be a time in the history of humanity where human beings should be the most alert, recognizing that the times are not just business as usual, that we find ourselves in the eye of the storm, and that our world can be plunged into worldwide chaos on all levels, I think we would all shift our focus from these unnecessary and useless obsessions and instead turn our attention to things and events that are of more significant worth. Now, I've done some research on the Bilderberg's history, and in the next presentation we'll do it on the agenda of the 2016 meeting, and that's going to be amazing. But I would like to share some of this information with you, what I have found. And please bear in mind that I am not only approaching this topic from a mere historical perspective, or that I'm trying to interpret the present geopolitical events from a left or a right-wing political perspective, but instead I'm seeing these events from Bible prophecy, from biblical prophecy. So before I go into my findings, I would like to thank and acknowledge the hard work that some in the alternative media are doing every single day, who are exposing these globalists despite the dangers and the threats they receive every single day. So thank you. But it is my opinion that unless we have a safe ground to stand up on, which in my case, in my understanding, would be Bible prophecy, which exactly tells us to the point who is and who are the movers and shakers of this world, we are just in for speculation and guesswork. Now, as we read in the CNBC article, the first Bilderberg meeting was in 1954, and this picture is actually from there. And the chair of the meeting was Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. But the question is, was he the brain behind the meeting? No. Instead, it was a Polish political advisor by the name of Joseph Retinger, who is actually behind Prince Bernhard in this picture. Now, Retinger was not a small fish, so to speak. Just listen to what Sir Edward Beddington wrote in a eulogy. I have traveled a great deal with Joseph Retinger. His friendship in high places were extraordinary. I remember in the United States his picking up the telephone and immediately making an appointment with the president, and in Europe he had the complete entree in every political circle. Joseph Retinger inspired the creation of the European movement, which brought about the Council of Europe. The whole development of the idea of the unity of Europe, the creation of the common market, the European League for Economic Cooperation, the Central and Eastern European Commission for the European Movement, he later founded the Bilderberg Group. So though dead since 1960, his shadows are still being with us and affecting us every single day in the political world. Retinger is actually one of the architects of the European project and perhaps the most influential political leader that has ever lived in Europe since the Second World War. And he is, as we saw, the mind behind the Bilderberg. So if we want to understand the aim of the Bilderberg, we have to understand the philosophy of Retinger. And Sir Edmund Beddington has already told us his philosophy was basically the idea of the unity of Europe. Retinger also focused on the importance of healthy relationships between the US and Europe. But if you don't think that this is not a credible source about Sir Edmund Beddington, let us ask Retinger himself in his autobiography. It says, in 1924, I, Retinger, became imbued with the idea of the unity of Europe. And in 1946, I felt the time had again come to make a new effort in the direction of the unity of Europe. I made a start by giving a lecture at the Royal Institute of International Affairs at Chatham House, May the 7th, under the title European Continent. So the picture is, since 1924, and in this talk from 1946, the foundational thoughts for a European unification are being presented by Retinger. So I actually took a look at his speech and I found some very interesting parallels. Let me share them with you. It says, beginning of the speech, during long centuries it was an accepted fact that the continent was ruled by doctrine of the Universal Roman Church, whose sway was for a long time supported by the hierarchy of the feudal system. Even after it had revolted against Rome, the Protestant Church still continued to champion and fight for the unity of the continent. So it seems to be the case that the point of reference for Retinger in discovering complete unity within the European continent needs to be seen from what occurred during the Middle Ages, and most importantly, when it was ruled by the doctrine of the Universal Roman Church. But the question is, how was the political climate after the Second World War? Retinger says, in modern times, in other words his time, this would be 1930s, 1940s, there have been put forward only two proposals for the unification of the continent. The one based on economic theory, Hitler's New Order, and the other on socialist ideology, the communist state. Now these are both extremes, and the Poles who stood at the confluence of these two ideas rejected them both, since neither offers them at least chance of preserving their national culture and spiritual independence. So his critique of these theories, Hitler's fascism and communism, is actually incredibly to the point. As we in 2016 will look back into his analysis, we can say that he was actually spot on. You know, Hitler's New Order was gone, and with the demise of communism in the 1990s, he is spot on. So the thing is this, if these theories will not and cannot be the basis for the unification of the continent, what is it that can? He continues, present conditions demand a long series of far-reaching political compromises if a happier and more peaceful political future is to be achieved. All right, how is this compromise to be lived out? Sikorski was one of the prime ministers of Poland, was also the first active European statesman to indicate publicly and officially that the European states ought to relinquish part of their sovereignty for the common interest. So now it is getting interesting. We are getting a bit closer now. In this unification of the continent, the European states ought to relinquish not all of their sovereignty, but part of their sovereignty for the common interest. Or another expression could be the common good. Common good. You see where we are going? No? Let us continue then. He ends the postscript with these words. At the present, the continental states have their eyes glued each on its patch of ground, which they are busily trying to weed. If this weeding is to serve any purpose, they must raise their eyes and look both back and forward, back to the old unity of the continent and forward to its renewed unification. Now this is where he has completely told us what he thinks. The old unity of the continent is what he had somewhat faintly told us in the beginning of the speech, namely a unification which was most predominant during the Middle Ages, which was ruled by the doctrine of the Universal Roman Church, whose sway was for a long time supported by the hierarchy of the feudal system. And you're saying, Sebastian, are you telling me that his vision for the unification of Europe was to be found in Roman Catholicism, in Roman Catholic Church? Well, absolutely. Let me give you 5 reasons why I believe that this is not just a conspiracy theory, if you think that, but an honest fact of reality and reliable observation of history. First of all, as Sir Edward Beddington said, and even Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands wrote fondly of Retinger, as we can see in the 1996 booklet which celebrated the 50th anniversary of the European League for Economic Cooperation, he said this, Poland was his motherland. He was passionately attached to her, and during the Second World War, though no longer in the first flush of youth, he risked his life by parachuting into occupied territory to contact the Polish resistance. But he cherished with him another great love, a united Europe. So in other words, if we want to have some unity, obviously the ideas needs to be implemented, and the ideas that needs to be implemented is basically a united Europe. But what is it that is going to hold the united Europe together? In my previous clip, and this is my second reason, in my previous clip, Pope Has a Dream for Europe, I analyzed the founding fathers of the European Union and who they were. And to my, and perhaps to your big surprise, the 3 central pillars who moved the European unification forward was Konrad Adenauer, Robert Schuman, and Alcide de Gasperi, who interestingly enough were all practicing Catholics. But not only that, they went to monasteries and meditated just before they would make important political decisions for the European project. And the reason for this European unification project was the reason, as we read, that the idea of united Europe has its roots in Christianity. Its foundation is Christianity with the idea of evangelical solidarity and desire for the truth and justice. The first politicians who put this into practice were Robert Schuman, Konrad Adenauer, and Alcide de Gasperi. They experienced their faith in an authentic way, and they drew inspiration to act for the common good. This is where we have the word. This is the same expression that even Retinger used when he said, we must relinquish part of our sovereignty for the common interest. So here we have it. A united Europe is finding its roots in Christianity, and it is for the common good. Let us continue. They wanted to give soul to Europe. In other words, we need to give a life to Europe, and this soul is Christian. And this is what the Pope urged both the European Parliament and the Council of Europe in 2014, and when he received the Charlemagne Prize this year, that in order for Europe to be thriving again and not to be a grandmother, Europe needs to find its soul again, because if it does not, it is going to die. And the soul is, please remember, Roman Catholicism. That's the idea of the European Union. Now, thirdly, up until this time, in my research, I have only identified the founding fathers of the European Union, but I had not discovered the brain behind the project. This is where it gets interesting. The brain who constructed this whole project was none other than Joseph Retinger. You remember what Sir Edward Beddington said? Let me read again. Joseph Retinger inspired the creation of the European movement, which brought about the Council of Europe. The whole development of the idea of the unity of Europe, creation of the common market, the European League for Economic Cooperation, the Central and Eastern European Commission for the European Movement, he later founded the Bilderberg Group. The European Movement, Unity of Europe, the Common Market, which was created by the Treaty of Rome in 1957, do all originate in the mind of Retinger and his vision for Europe. Interesting. Now, fourthly, would it surprise you that the first meetings of the Bilderberg involved discussions on how to create the unity of Europe through treaties like the Treaty of Rome in 1957? Well, one of the participants of the first couple of meetings of the Bilderberg was a former US ambassador by the name of George McGee, said this. When asked for an example of a Bilderberg accomplishment, George McGee said this, I believe you could say the Treaty of Rome, which brought the common market into being. Now, friends, this is absolutely amazing. So behind closed doors, discussing how this could happen, and this is not the only event which the Bilderberg has been involved in. There are so many examples which I could give and you can check out and research on the internet. So we have take a look at 4 reasons, and now we come to the last one. Maybe you have already guessed it, but in Ratinger's autobiography, it actually says, to a young man like myself, educated in a devout Catholic atmosphere. But you see, Retinger was not only a Roman Catholic, but he was more than that. He was, yes, you guessed it correctly, he was a Jesuit. We read, though people persist in calling Retinger an 18th century man functioning in the 20th century, he was not at all. He came straight out of the Renaissance. Instead of the skeptical, presumed attitude typical of the 18th century, listen to this, his Jesuitical conviction that the end justified the means and a Borgian aptitude for intrigue, but the ends he sought were never selfish, they were good. Well, depends on how you define good. Though his name is virtually unknown except to the initiates. He made more history in his secret way than many a man who moved to the sound of trumpets and the howl of motorcycle sirens. According to the official publication of the European Center of Culture, Retinger was the key figure in most of the great European Union. Wow! The League of European Economic Cooperation, from which evolved the Common Market, the European Movement, and the European Center of Culture would not have seen the light without him. The Congress of Europe, The Hague, was his doing, and the Council of Europe grew out of that. And so as I was doing my research, I was so fascinated because I saw the founding fathers that they were Catholics, and I even discovered that Schumann had his education from the Jesuits, but knowing that the mind and the brain behind the Bilderberg and the mind behind the European Unification Project was a Jesuit, I was blown away. And I discovered this as I was doing my further research. I read this from a site called bilderbergmeetings.co.uk. It said, speaking about Retinger, between 1906 and 1920, he worked on projects as diverse as, listen to this, the definition of a reorganization plan for Central and Eastern Europe wanted by who? The general of the Jesuits, the Polish Count Dedechowski Vladimir. Now this is absolutely amazing. I mean, that they would openly admit this makes my research too easy. And this is what a true Jesuit would do. They would follow the orders from the Jesuit general. Now before I go on and continue to look at Retinger's life and not only his vision for the European Unification Project, but also his aim and his vision for the Bilderberg Group, let me quote from a powerful book which I hope you will read in the near future. If you haven't read it yet, it's called The Great Controversy. It's one of the most powerful books that I ever read in my life, and it says this about the Protestant Reformation and the Jesuit order. Throughout Christendom, Protestantism was menaced by formidable foes. The first triumphs of the Reformation past, Rome summoned in new forces, hoping to accomplish its destruction. At this time, the order of the Jesuits was created, the most cruel, unscrupulous, and powerful of all the champions of popery. Cut off from every earthly tie and human interest, dead to the claims of natural affection, reason, and conscience, wholly silenced, they knew no rule, no time, but that of their order, and no duty but to extend its power. To combat these forces, in other words, the gospel of Jesus Christ, Jesuitism inspired its followers with a fanaticism that enabled them to endure like dangers and to oppose to the power of truth all the weapons of deception. There was no crime too great for them to commit, no deception too base for them to practice, no disguise too difficult for them to assume. Vowed to perpetual poverty and humility, it was their studied aim to secure wealth and power. And listen to this, to be devoted to the overthrow of Protestantism and the re-establishment of papal supremacy. So the Jesuits exist for this sole purpose: crush biblical Protestantism and to re-establish papal power which it had lost during the Middle Ages. What does it sound like? Does it sound like Retinger? Oh, absolutely. Let us continue. But under this blameless exterior, the most criminal and deadly purposes were concealed. It was a fundamental principle of the order that the end justifies the means. Did we read about Retinger? Oh, yes, we did. By this code, lying, theft, perjury, assassination were not only pardonable, but commendable when they served the interests of the Church, in other words, the Pope. Under various disguises, the Jesuits worked their way into office of state, climbing up to the counselors of kings and shaping the policy of nations. All the outward pomp and display of the Romish worship was brought to bear to confuse the mind and dazzle and captivate the imagination, and thus the liberty for which the fathers had toiled and bled was betrayed by the sons. The Jesuits rapidly spread themselves over Europe, and wherever they went, there followed a revival of popery. So with this in mind, that the Jesuits, under various disguises, worked their ways into offices of state to become counselors of kings and to shape policies of nations, how much of this can be true of Retinger? Everything. 100%. For instance, we read Life in the Shadows. Swings among the Swingses. Retinger was described by Ambassador Pietro Quaroni, shortly after his death, as one who, quote, knew how to work in the shadows and stay in the shadows. Interesting. According to Quaroni, he had learned this great truth, difficult to learn and hard to practice. If you really want to achieve something in the great game of politics, you should know not to chase prominence. There are two different functions and both are required. The big stars that hold the center stage and the ants who work in the shadows. This is exactly true. The Jesuits are not interested in to be in the spotlight. Why? Because he was also personifying the Templar motto. Now let us stop here. Do not think that the Templars are dead. For instance, we read in Morals and Dogma that the Templars, like all other secret orders and associations, which would involve the Jesuit order, had two doctrines. One concealed and reserved for the masters, which was Johannism. The other public, which was the Roman Catholic. And this is similar with the Jesuit order. On the outward, there is a sign of religious piety. But as I already told you, it's all about re-establishing papal supremacy, which involves not only religious, it involves the ecumenical movement, which they are part of. No, they are not part of it. They are leading it, but also political and the financial world. After all, we read in the Great Controversy that they want to re-establish papal supremacy. And this is why groups like the Bilderberg play a pivotal role. So let us continue. That he personified the Templar motto. And what was that? Non nubis. Non nubis, not unto us. Retinger participated in the major international political intrigues of the 20th century out of idealism. I wonder what that idealism was. Was it perhaps Jesuitism? Johannism? Because of his love and admiration of the men he decided to serve. Now, who was he serving? The Pope of Rome, of course. Take a look at the Jesuit oath. Non nubis. Non nubis. You know what that means? It means not unto us. Not unto me. No. I'm humble. Don't give me pride. Don't give me anything. Not unto me. I'm not doing this for myself. This is what a Jesuit is doing. He doesn't do it for his own sake. But as it says in the Jesuit oath, which I have spoken about before, it simply says that they are doing everything possible to serve the Pope. Absolutely amazing. It continues. On 2 occasions he abandoned his wife and children to devote himself to his career and to pursue his childhood dream, to see a free and united Poland built in a free and united Europe, radiating in a free and united world. As he learned to ride the winds of power, he found himself swept upwards to the summit of Olympus. From here on, he never ceases to associate with men of prominence. Interesting. His influence began to be felt from 10 Downing Street, that is Britain, to the Quai d'Orsay, from the Vatican to the Kremlin. Ratinger's understanding of psychology and human relations gave him an ability to blend in like a chameleon wherever he went. Associate with men of prominence, blending in like a chameleon wherever he went. Is that what we read about the Jesuits, what they would do? Under various disguises, the Jesuits worked their way into offices of state, climbing up to the counselors of kings and shaping the policy of nations. I think the author was absolutely correct. And this is just one instance out of many. It continues about the Mexico years. Dr. R's knack for what? Infiltration was disturbing to some, such as Lord Northcliffe in England, George Mendel in France, and he became persona non grata in Europe, and he was forced to emigrate. That's what happened to the Jesuits in the 1700s and in so many other places. They simply infiltrated. Thus he spent the 20s and 30s overseas as charge d'affaires in Mexico. What was he doing in Mexico? Was he at the beach just playing around, having a nice time? Oh, no. He was actually helping the Mexican president. He became the counselor for the Mexican president. How did he do it? Well, only a Jesuit can do that. As a European patriot, he dedicated his energies to political, economic, cultural, and even spiritual unification of the old continent. And for this, the European Union owes him much. If you take the time to study his career, yes, we have done that, it is hard to not be impressed by this man who dedicated his life to his ideals. Well, Jesuitism. He managed to bend to his will an impressive array of powerful people, forcing them to follow a path he had traced for them, a path beyond divisions and resentments, a path he hoped would lead to universal peace and harmony between peoples. Friends, this is the philosophy of Joseph H. Retinger, with a Jesuitical inspiration to unite Europe and even the world under the leadership of the Bishop of Rome, the Pope himself. And this is the philosophy that has been underlying the Bilderberg agenda since its inception. Yes, for most of the time, the different plans that they've been putting out has served mainly secular purposes. But understanding the philosophy of Retinger and his dream, we can surely conclude what Bible prophecy said so long ago in the book of Revelation chapter 13 verse 3, that this so-called religio-political system, for which the Bible calls it the Antichrist, which is a system that takes the place of Christ both religiously and politically speaking, this system will at the end of time, just before the second coming of Jesus Christ, regain its lost power. We read, the Bible says, and all the world wondered after the beast. I have in several of my clips tried to show you exactly this. And having an understanding now of the history of the Bilderberg and the brain behind the Bilderberg, the Jesuit Joseph H. Retinger, I think we are now ready to discover the 2016 agenda of the Bilderberg, the so-called precariat, and how it relates to Bible prophecy and the imminent return of yours and mine Savior, Jesus Christ. Well, thank you for watching. Thank you for being a part of this. And please remember that if you are watching this, then indeed you are part of the spiritual resistance.